Hello boys and girls. Today with me I have my special friend David Clark, and he's going to help us read Mr. Grumpy by Roger Hargreaves. Are you ready? Do you have your special friend as well? Let's get started. Mr. Grumpy by Roger Hargreaves. It was a lovely summer evening. Mr. Grumpy was at home. Crosspatch Cottage. He sat down in an armchair and picked up a book. And then, do you know what he did? He tore all the pages out of it. Every one. Mr. Grumpy can't stand books. Oh gosh, that's not very good. Please don't do that to my Mr. Mem books. He has a shocking bad temper. In fact, he's quite the most bad-tempered person you can imagine. Grumpy by name and even more grumpy by nature. The following morning, he was out in his garden pulling up the flowers. He couldn't stand pretty flowers growing in his garden, when out of the corner of his eye he saw a figure. Who do you think that is, David? It was Mr. Happy. Yay! I love Mr. Happy. Good morning, said Mr. Happy. Good, said Mr. Grumpy. What's good about it? But, said Mr. Happy. But nothing, went on Mr. Grumpy. Get out of my garden. I beg your pardon, said Mr. Happy. You heard me, snapped Mr. Grumpy. Go away. I say, laughed Mr. Happy, you're a bad-tempered fellow. Oof, grunted Mr. Grumpy, and went on to Mr. Happy. Bad-tempered fellas need to change their ways. Ooh, what do you think's going to happen? There's Mr. Happy, and there's Mr. Grumpy. Rubbish, retorted Mr. Grumpy, and went into his cottage, deliberately stepping on Mr. Happy's foot as he passed him. So that's not very nice. Ouch, said Mr. Happy. Bang went the door of Crosspatch Cottage as Mr. Grumpy slammed it behind him. Poor Mr. Happy and his sore foot. Mr. Happy stood there looking not quite so happy as he normally does. His foot hurt. He thought and thought and thought some more. Then he had an idea. He smiled and went to see Mr. Tickle. Ooh. Do you like Mr. Tickle? Mr. Tickle's one of my favourites. Oh, this page is tricky. Got it! You happy I got it, David? Mm-hmm. Mr. Happy told Mr. Tickle of his idea on how to get Mr. Grumpy to change his ways. And Mr. Tickle grinned the sort of grin that goes from ear to ear. That is, if you have ears, which he doesn't. Oh, he grinned, rubbing his hands at the end of those extraordinary long arms of his together. That sounds fun. There's Mr. Happy talking to Mr. Tickle. That afternoon, Mr. Grumpy went to town shopping. He walked into Mr. Meat's shop. Mr. Meat was a butcher. Give me some sausages, snapped Mr. Grumpy, and be quick about it. Oh, that's not very nice. Poor Mr. Meat, who was frightened of Mr. Grumpy, did as he was told. But as he was doing as he was told, something appeared through his shop doorway. Do you know what it was? There's Mr. Meat giving Mr. Grumpy. And there's something down here, boys and girls, that you might recognise from previous Mr. Mem books. It was an extraordinarily long arm belonging to, well, you can guess who it belonged to, can't you? That extraordinary long arm of Mr. Tickle came in through the door and across the shop and up to Mr. Grumpy and tickled him. Oh, squeaked Mr. Grumpy in alarm, dropping his sausages and looking round to see what had happened. But could he see anything? He could not. There's Mr. Tickle's extraordinarily long arm. Humph, grunted Mr. Grumpy and picked up his sausages and went next door to the cake shop. Crash went the door of the shop. There's Mr. Grumpy. He's on his way to the cake store. "Give me a cake," snapped Mr. Grumpy, "and hurry up." Poor Mrs. Fairy, who sold cakes, was frightened of Mr. Grumpy, so she did as she was told. But as she was doing as she was told, guess what happened? "Oh!" squeaked Mr. Grumpy, dropping his cake and his sausages. He just couldn't understand what was happening. There's Mrs. Fairy, and there's Mr. Grumpy, and can you see what's happening up here, boys and girls? Can you see, David? Can you see? Wowzers. And the same thing happened to at Mr. Daly's, the newspaper shop, and at Mrs. Humbug's, the sweet shop, and at Mr. Bottle's dairy, and at the Packets, the grocer's. It went on all afternoon. Poor Mr. Grumpy, doing his shopping, he kept on dropping it. And all afternoon Mr. Grumpy kept being tickled and dropping his shopping and picking it up and being tickled and dropping his shopping and picking it up and being tickled and dropping his shopping and he just couldn't understand it. There's Mr. Grumpy. On his way home to Crosspatch Cottage, he met Mr. Happy again. "Hello," grinned Mr. Happy. "Having a nice day?" "Get out of my way," snapped Mr. Grumpy, "before I kick you." Oh, that's really not very nice. It's very grumpy, isn't it? But almost before the words had passed his lips, that extraordinarily long arm of Mr. Tickles had appeared from behind a tree and tickled him yet again. He jumped in the air and dropped all of his shopping yet again and fell over. Mr. Happy looked down at Mr. Grumpy lying amid a jumble of sausages and cake and newspapers and sweets and milk and cornflakes. "I think," he laughed, "that if you were to change your ways and be not quite so bad-tempered quite so often, this sort of thing might not happen to you quite so often." There's Mr. Happy explaining it to Mr. Grumpy, and there's Mr. Tickles and "Humph!" grunted Mr. Grumpy. He picked up all his shopping yet again and went home to Crosspatch Cottage. But on his way he did think about what Mr. Happy had said, because he very definitely did not like what happened to him that afternoon. Mr. Happy and Mr. Tickle laughed and shook hands. There's Mr. Tickle and his extraordinarily long arms. And soon after that he did try to be not quite so bad-tempered quite so often. And the more he tried, the less he found he was tickled. And so he tried more and more. And these days he's quite a changed person. Why, only the other evening he picked up a book, and do you know what? Or what do you think happened when he picked up the book? Because earlier in the story he ripped out all the pages. He only tore out one page. Oh, what a relief, David. Did you like that story? Wow, there we go. Mr. Grumpy by Roger Hargreaves.